All right, let's jump right in. We're going to unpack one of the, well, strangest stories in the entire Old Testament. And according to our source material, hidden inside this story about a prophet, a king, and yes, a talking donkey, there's a surprisingly deep message about how we see the world.
Now, I know what you're thinking. A talking donkey? Seriously? It sounds like something straight out of a kid's movie. And trying to explain it to someone can feel a little awkward. So why on earth is a story like this in a sacred text? That's the big question our source material really wants to tackle.
Okay, so to understand the talking donkey, you first have to understand the man who was riding it. Let's get to know our main character, a prophet named Balaam.
And here's the thing our source is quick to point out. Balaam wasn't your average prophet. He was what they called a soothsayer, a diviner. So think of him less like a humble messenger and more like a high-end magician you'd hire for his supernatural skills. He was basically a prophet for hire.
And his reputation was huge. I mean, so big that his name actually pops up in ancient writings that have nothing to do with the Bible. So when Balak, the king of Moab, sees this massive nation of Israelites heading towards his land, he completely panics. And what do you do when you're a powerful king who's terrified? You hire the best spiritual muscle money can buy. So he sends for Balaam to curse his enemies.
And this is where the trouble really starts. God flat out tells Balaam, "Don't go, those are my people." So at first Balaam says no. But King Balak won't take no for an answer. He just keeps upping the offer. More money, more fame, more honor. Until finally, Balaam's greed just takes over. He decides, okay, I'm going.
And that one decision, to ignore what God said and chase that big payday instead, is what leads us straight into the most famous and, yeah, the weirdest part of this whole story.
So as Balaam is riding, his donkey sees something he can't see. An angel of the Lord standing right there on the road, holding a drawn sword. The donkey, totally freaked out, tries to get away. First, it runs into a field. But Balaam, who is completely blind to the danger, just thinks the animal is being stubborn, so he beats it. This happens 2 more times, with the poor donkey doing everything it can to avoid the angel, and each time Balaam just gets angrier and angrier, beating it furiously. And after that 3rd beating, something absolutely miraculous happens. The Lord literally gives the donkey the power of speech, and it asks this simple, devastating question. What have I done to you that made you hit me these 3 times? It's only then, after this impossible moment, that God finally opens Balaam's eyes. And suddenly, he sees him, the angel with the drawn sword. The angel then explains that he was there to stop Balaam's rebellious trip, and that the donkey, in its so-called disobedience, had actually just saved his life 3 times. So, what is the point of all this whole crazy scene? Well, our source argues this isn't just some weird, quirky anecdote. It's a powerful metaphor for 2 completely different ways of seeing the world.
And this is really the heart of it. On one side, you've got Balaam, the famous prophet, the wise guy, who was so blinded by what he wanted, by his own greed, that he couldn't see the divine truth standing right in front of his face. And on the other side, you have the donkey, a simple, humble animal who was spiritually awake enough to see what was really going on.
This contrast between being prideful and blind versus being humble and able to see, this is where our source connects the dots to something that calls the Savior's invitation to follow him. The idea is that every single one of us faces the same choice that these characters did.
So, according to the source, when we accept this invitation, we're choosing to be more like the humble, obedient donkey and less like the proud, self-reliant prophet. It's about being willing to listen, to trust that there's a better way, and to get that humility is the key that unlocks spiritual vision. It's about not just relying on what you think you know.
And this whole pattern of using weird or simple stories to teach these massive truths, that's not an accident. The source suggests this is exactly why Jesus so often taught in parables. They were stories designed for people with eyes to see and ears to hear, not for the worldly wise, but for those who were humble enough to search for a deeper meaning.
And finally, our source brings it all home by contrasting the final outcomes of these 2 paths. The path of the wise man who trusts himself and the path of the humble follower. And wow, the difference is night and day.
The worldview of someone like Balaam, someone driven by their own ambition and blind to anything higher, is compared to Shakespeare's tragic hero Macbeth. You might remember, at the end of his life, after chasing power and destroying everything, Macbeth looks back and realizes his life was just a pointless story, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. It's a dark, empty conclusion, but our source suggests it's where you end up when you live without that higher purpose.
But to show the alternative, the source brings in this beautiful, powerful poem called The Touch of the Master's Hand. It tells the story of an old violin. So the poem sets the scene at an auction. This old, dusty, beat-up violin is held up. It looks forgotten, pretty much worthless, and the bidding shows it. $1. Who'll give $1? $2. It's about to be sold for next to nothing.
But then, out of the crowd, an old master musician comes forward. He gently picks up the violin, wipes the dust off, and just starts to play. And out of this thing that looked like junk comes a melody so pure and beautiful, the poem says it sounded like an angel singing.
While the auctioneer, totally amazed, starts the bidding over. And now the bids just explode. $1,000, $2,000, $3,000. The crowd is stunned. Someone yells out the question on everyone's mind. What changed? What made it worth so much? And the simple answer comes right back. The touch of the master's hand.
And that's the final powerful metaphor. A life that might feel battered, maybe a little scarred, totally out of tune, just like that old violin, can be completely transformed. Its real, incredible worth can be brought out, not by its own power, but by allowing the touch of the master.
And this brings us right back to where we started, with a talking donkey. The whole story, as our source sees it, really leaves us with this one big question to chew on. What angels might be standing in our own path that we can't see? What amazing truths could be revealed to us if only we were willing to be a little less like the wise prophet and a little more like his humble donkey?